From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Congress meets to certify the Electoral College votes for Donald Trump's presidential victory. Will there be any Democratic protests at the Capitol? And what about Donald Trump's promise to pardon the January 6 rioters from 4 years ago? Plus, Trump and Republican leaders in Congress seem to decide to go with one big, beautiful bill for the Trump agenda, as Donald Trump calls it, rather than breaking it up into two parts that could pass, one part quickly and another part, the tax part, later. What are they thinking with a strategy, and what are the risks? Welcome to Potomac Watch, the daily podcast to Wall Street Journal opinion pages. I'm Paul Gigot, editor of those pages, and I'm here with Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson, my esteemed colleagues. Well, the holidays are over. I can certainly tell from my email load, which is coming fast and furious after some blessedly quiet weeks. But Congress is back, and it'll certify the electoral votes for Donald Trump. 312 electoral votes from 31 states, plus Maine's 2nd congressional district, compared to 226, plus votes in 19 states, I think it is, plus D.C., District of Columbia, and Nebraska's 2nd congressional district for Kamala Harris. Trump also won the popular vote with 49.9% to Kamala Harris's 48.4%. But in the U.S. system, the Electoral College is what counts, and today is the decisive day of certification. Now, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump's competitor, will, by an accident of the Constitution and the fact that she's vice president, preside over the session. Let's listen to how she describes her duty.
This duty is a sacred obligation, one I will uphold, guided by love of country, loyalty to our Constitution, and my unwavering faith in the American people. As we have seen, our democracy can be fragile, and it is up to then each one of us to stand up for our most cherished principles.
Well, you hear hints there of tweaking the memories of Donald Trump for the memories of January 6, 2021. Kim, do you expect any drama or fireworks in the session today? We're meeting here for this podcast before the actual vote.
I do not. And we should all be really grateful for that, Paul. I mean, if you go back a few months before the election, there was still a lot of concern, or even a year before, that the people were not going to trust the results of this election. I do give credit to a lot of state officials around the country who worked hard to reassure voters that their counting systems were accurate, valid, correct, above board. We had an orderly election. We had pretty quick results, and things have proceeded since then. On December 17th, the electors met in their states to cast their votes respectively for the president and vice president. We did not have any faithless electors this time. Trump and J.D. Vance respectively each received 312 votes for president and vice president, and Harris and Walz each received 226 votes. And now what happens is those certificates are brought to Washington. At 1 o'clock today, Harris will ceremonially open each of those ballots in alphabetical order. They will be read out and lodged. And because of actions that Congress took in the wake of January 6, 4 years ago, the Electoral Count Reform Act, there's going to be fewer chances of anybody trying to disrupt that process, because it has been made more difficult for members of the House and the Senate to object to results, and the power of the president of the Senate, in this case, Harris fulfilling that role, has also been reduced to one of a ceremonial role. So there's nothing on the horizon that anyone looks to be doing anything this time. That's going to be a pretty orderly, and we should be happily boring transition of power.
Now, the Electoral Count Reform Act you talked about did make certain that stipulated that the VP's role was ceremonial. That was the dispute in 2020. Donald Trump saying it was more than that, and that's why Mike Pence had the ability to interfere with the counting. My view was that the Constitution didn't allow that his role was merely ceremonial, but now it's formalized in statute with clarity. But Democrats have in the past, and let's make clear, Republicans in 2020, many of them, I think a majority of the House Republicans, in fact, voted against the certification of some states, results. Even after the riot at the Capitol on January 6th during the day, they resumed the joint session of Congress later that night, or was it in the early morning, but overnight, and did certify the vote. But some of them still voted against that. We had urged them, especially in the wake of the riot, to demonstrate their support for the electoral result. Democrats have protested in the past, Kyle, not in any kind of the way that Republicans did, but some have objected in previous elections. I can think of 2004 in particular.
Yeah, and in 2004, it was complaints about alleged problems with voting machines in Ohio. In 2016, there were complaints lodged. It's been a slow building process of a few of these people who are in Congress deciding that this is a great chance to grandstand, to score some partisan points, because they know that the majority of the colleagues are going to certify the electors as legitimate. And we saw in 2021 where that ultimately leads. And so I think it's good that Congress went back and passed this Electoral Count Reform Act and tightened up some of these alleged ambiguities in this law and in this process. And I will also say this is one of the reasons that you don't want willy-nilly changes to voting procedures, voting laws in the middle of an election, is because you want a result that both sides think is fair and both sides can respect. And thankfully, we have that in 2024, a pretty clear, decisive result for President Trump.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the echoes of January 6th, 2021, when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Potomac Watch, the podcast of Wall Street Journal Opinion, and I'm here with Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson. January 6th count does echo of that day 4 years ago. Kim, and Donald Trump's promise now to pardon some of those rioters, people who entered the Capitol that day. Trump hasn't been clear about how many of those he will pardon, or what the standards for a pardon would be. But what do you expect? Do you think he's going to go ahead with this?
Well, I certainly hope that he looks at this information extremely carefully, because one of the things the Republican Party has always been proud of, it likes to boast about, is that it's the law and order party. And if you look at the people who were in Washington that day, an estimated 50,000 or people or so showed up at that rally where he gave a speech at the Ellipse. About 2,000 to 2,500 are estimated by the FBI to have gone to the Capitol and entered the grounds. We've had about 1,600 prosecutions so far been brought. And if you dig into those, a lot of these are folks that I don't think anybody would be very proud of or eager to be running to defend. A lot of the folks, there's been a lot of media about supposed unfair prosecutions and people being held hostage to the justice system. But we had a great editorial today that digs into some of these folks. I mean, one example, a guy who was only convicted a couple of weeks ago, Joshua Lee Atwood, he unloaded a can of pepper spray at the police. He hit them with a pole. He pelted them with metal scaffolding pipe. He had a pending felony case for alleged 2023 stabbing. These are some of the folks that are up in the dock and have been found to be guilty, some by juries, some because they pleaded guilty. You heard Donald Trump in the past say, well, they were essentially ramrodded through this system. They had no choice but to plead guilty. That's not how our system works. And if they really did feel that they had good grounds to be exonerated, they could have asked for a jury trial. They did not have to agree to charges. So I think it's really worth his effort looking closely at this, because we don't want to be rewarding behavior that most people, when they looked at those videos and they saw people battling police, most people would not be quick to stand up and say anything was okay about that.
The standard he sets, it could be that anybody who assaulted police does not get pardoned. Anybody who engaged in violence does not get pardoned. Whereas the people who might have simply gone into the Capitol, kind of going with the crowd if they were arrested. Now, many of those, Kyle, have not been prosecuted, that were just found themselves kind of walking in once the barriers were down. I think your data showed as of early November, 1,028 cases had been fully adjudicated through the court system, 645 resulting in jail time, 143 home detention. So the facts, the details matter. But one other point I wanted to make about sort of the mass pardon that Trump is talking about here is that that's usually a Democratic thing. I mean, Joe Biden obviously just commuted the sentences of 1,500 people just last month. And of course, one of the more famous cases in American history was Jimmy Carter pardoning the draft resistors during the Vietnam War. Well, in his case, it was after the war, but pardoned those draft resistors, some of whom had fled to Canada.
Yeah, I think the details, as Kim points out here, matter significantly. The U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., the federal prosecutors there have said that they have not prosecuted generally people whose only crime was trespass on the restricted grounds outside the Capitol. The estimate that I have seen for that number is maybe 10,000 people converge outside the Capitol that day. And some of these cases are pretty serious to me. There's another guy who was sentenced last month, 60 months, 50-year-old man. He allegedly went to the Capitol with his own metal baton. He brought it with him in a hip holster. There's video of him swinging it at the police line. The trial could not conclusively show whether he made contact and actually hit anybody. He, by the way, denies that he brought this metal baton. He says that it was actually a flashlight on his belt there, but the FBI and the court seemed to find that that was not credible, that the video did not match the flashlight holster that he actually brought into his trial. And that story, I think, helps illustrate the difference in these cases. People who plead guilty and they admit wrongdoing, as is often true in the criminal justice system, can get lesser sentences than people who deny that they did anything wrong, go to trial, maybe they lie on the witness stand, they get convicted by a unanimous jury. And the same is true even in nonviolent cases. If you look at some of these sentencing memos, I think it matters whether somebody was organized and came to January 6th ready to rumble or not. It matters if they were in the vanguard of the protesters breaking in and opening doors for others or not. It matters if they have previous convictions. I think those are all the things that factor into some of these sentences, and I would hope that the president would look closely at.
We'll see what he does when he comes in. There's no question there's going to be a lot of pardons and clemency. The question is how extensive it is and how much criticism the new president wants to take on when he does it, because there certainly will be much of that from Democrats and probably even from some reluctant Republicans who probably don't want to get crosswise with the president, but feel strongly that the Republican Party's reputation as the anti-crime party needs to be upheld and believe that, the crimes were committed and people need to be accountable.